Hi, I'm Aiden Taylor and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm really excited for today's video because we're going to be doing something that I've never done before. And I just figured it'd be fun to bring you guys along with me, and we'll just kind of try it out together, and if it works then you guys can follow along and make it yourself. We are going to be attempting to make vintage inspired Halloween buckets. I've seen them online for years and years and I absolutely love them, and I've always wanted to try and make them myself and sort of apply my own vintage style of my artwork to them. I figured what better time than now to try it out, and if they work out, they can be a part of my 2024 Halloween folk art collection. I'm gonna be kind of glazing over some of the materials that I'm using, but I will put some pictures up on the screen of products that I am using, but just keep an eye out for a more in-depth video in the future about my whole entire process and all of the products and tools that I prefer to use. With that being said, I guess let's just get right into it. Alright, so we're here at my work desk and I've got everything kind of situated so we can go ahead and get started on this. Now, the first thing we're going to need to do is blow up some balloons. You can use any kind of balloons. I'm just using these because we had these left over from probably an old birthday party. You don't want to blow the balloon up all the way. You kind of just want to keep it small. We're going to try and keep them small here. Just like that. I think this is about 4 inches wide. And we're just going to go ahead and tie it off. And here we go. We have 3 balloons ready to go. So now let's start mixing up some clay. I'll put a picture up on the screen now of the clay that I am using. I've been using this clay for years, and I will just briefly mention now that if you're thinking about using this clay and you want to start making some projects like this for yourself, you have been warned now that there will be clay powder everywhere. And I'm not gonna lie to you and say that this clay is easy to work with. It's definitely kind of a pain sometimes, but I like the finished result enough to put up with the hassle of dealing with it. I store all of mine in this airtight jar just so that it doesn't get any moisture in it. When you buy it, it originally comes in a bag, but I dump it all into here just so that it stays fresh. Now, the measurement is really up to y'all. Just go off of what it says on the packaging if you're unsure. I've been doing this for a long time, so I can kind of just eyeball it now. So that's what we're gonna do. Like I said before, I am gonna do another video about my entire process, and I'm gonna go more in depth about my measurements and my particular methods. Do also use a tiny food processor because I found that this clay is very difficult to mix really finely with your hands, and I just like the smooth texture that I can get out of a food processor. And all you do is add water. And I like to mix it periodically just to make sure that there's no dry powder left. We want all of it nice and mixed in there. Now my mixture is a little wet, so we're gonna add some more powder. This is what we wanna see. It's nice and thick and it stays on my knife and doesn't fall off. So I'm just transferring my clay into an airtight bowl so that I can seal it up if I don't use it all, which I know I'm gonna use it all, but just in case I have to leave or something comes up, I can just seal it up that way. Now I will also say, please do not blend this in your regular food processor. I bought this one specifically for clay and art stuff, so I don't recommend using this clay in your standard food processor as it is not food safe. Alright, so I'm just gonna start slathering the clay onto my balloon. I have done this once before and it worked pretty well, so we'll just see how it goes. But it's kind of tricky to get it to stay on the balloon as it is quite soft, but patience is key. I like to use a paint knife to smear my clay onto pretty much all of my projects. It's a great way to get a nice smooth surface. I find that the clay doesn't stick to the metal as bad. Now, if you try and use your hands, it will get stuck to your hands pretty bad. But just using a little water on your hands to smooth it out, I usually just tap it. That usually also helps give me a pretty smooth surface. Now, I'm not worried about the surface of this being smooth or pretty at all right now. This is just going to be our base shell for our bucket, and I'm going to go back later and add another layer once it's dried. I'm just trying to apply a thick enough coat that it won't break once it's dried. If you hold it up to the light, you can kind of see where the thin spots are. You just kind of want to fill those over just so that there's no weak spots, because once this dries, we're going to pop the balloon and you don't want it to crumble. I'm just gonna wet my hand so that I can hold the wet side of the clay and it won't stick. Alright, so my balloon is pretty well covered. I'm gonna wet both of my hands now and try and just kind of smooth it out as best as I can. I like to keep a pitcher of water here when I work with this clay because it does help throughout the process. And I'm just going to kind of press it into the balloon so that we get a nice, even, smooth coat. Like I said, it doesn't have to be pretty. It just needs to be even enough that it has structure so that it won't crack later on once we take the balloon out. Alright, I think we're pretty good there. I'm going to go ahead and cover the other three and I'll meet you back here. I've got all my balloons covered. I just put them in my dehydrator and now I'm going to let them dry overnight and we'll come back tomorrow and see how they look. Alright y'all, we are back. These have completely dried and we're not going to remove the balloon just yet. What we're going to do now is I'm going to cut out some circles out of this thin cardboard, and we're going to use that to make the bottom so that they sit nice and flat. So I'm just going to go ahead and trace out some circles. Now we're just going to cut these out. I would say these are about 2.5 inches wide. Alright, so next what we're going to do is we're going to find where we want the bottom of our bucket to be, and we're just going to put a large dot of hot glue right there, press on our piece of cardboard. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in and I'm going to fill this gap in a little bit with some extra hot glue, because otherwise if you don't, when we start adding our next layer of clay, the cardboard will get saturated from the water in the clay and it can start to cause problems and it'll warp a little bit. I want to move kind of quickly so your glue does not dry. And then you're going to stand it up so that the glue dries nice and flat. To do this to all three and then we'll be back. Alright, so our bases are done and they're sitting nice and steady now. And so I've already got another batch of clay mixed up here in my bowl. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually mark a circle around the top of where I want the opening to be, because if I just start throwing on another layer of clay, it's going to be too thick for me to cut away later. So I found this roll of tape. It seems to be just about the right size. Center this on top so that it is nice and level. And then I'm going to mark a circle all the way around the inside. Give me a guideline of where to put my clay up to, and then later once we remove the balloon, we can just break away this edge. Alright, so I've got circles drawn on all of these, and so now I'm just going to start applying my clay, and we're going to do another thin layer just to make sure that they have a nice smooth surface. And now here is like your opportunity to kind of decide what style you want to go for. Whether you want to go more textured for a more primitive look, or even if you want to go smoother like these guys to just look a little bit cleaner. So that's really up to you on what your preference is. I think I'm gonna probably go for a little bit more of an aged vintage look. Now, when you get down here to the bottom where we've added our cardboard, we are going to kind of bridge this gap between the base and the top with our clay. So we want to kind of pack our clay in there and get that gap nice and filled in. I'm just going to kind of smear the clay into that gap so that we have a nice seamless edge. Okay, my balloon is completely covered. I've got a nice lip of clay around the edge where we made that line. The issues I ran into was I normally put my clay pieces in the dehydrator because this clay does take a really long time to dry. But I think the heat from the dehydrator probably made the balloon expand a little bit. And once it cooled, it shrank, and that's caused some creasing and cracking. So I just kind of had to make sure that there was a nice thick layer over those cracks so that they don't crack anymore. So I'm going to put this guy in the dehydrator. I'm going to go ahead and put clay on the other two, and then I'll meet you back here tomorrow once they're fully dried. Alright everybody, we are back the next day. I've got these guys out of the dehydrator. I did go ahead and take the balloon out of one of them just to make sure everything was okay, and we did hit a bump. So we'll talk about that now. You want to make sure that your bucket is completely dry before you try and take the balloon out. Otherwise, you'll run into a similar issue that I did on this one, which is that bottom ring where we put all that clay in this crease, it is still wet. So you want to be sure that your clay has completely hardened all the way through before you try and take the balloon out. Otherwise, it's gonna crack, it's gonna get stuck, and it's gonna try and pull that bottom off. So we learned our lesson. These two, I believe, are a little bit more dry, so we're gonna go ahead and run through this now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some scissors and I'm just gonna carefully snip a hole in this balloon. And you can kind of see, it'll start to pull away, but you're gonna have to go in and really carefully peel away the balloon off of the edges. Because like I said, if you're unsure, there might be a wet spot, be very careful, because if you just try and yank that balloon out, it's going to completely crack your bucket. Ta-da! Look at that, nice and clean. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some flush cutters or wire snips, and I'm just going to start cutting away this excess clay that right up to that line that we made with our second layer. So we're just going to start cutting this away so that we have a nice clean opening to our bucket. And you want to be kind of careful with this. Take your time, because again, this clay is very brittle and you do run the risk of cracking it. So little pieces at a time. We're just going to snip all the way around our bucket. There we go. So now we've got a nice clean opening, and now I'm going to take a sanding brick and I'm just going to go ahead and hit the whole thing and try and smooth out any rough spots and kind of focus more around the edge so that we have a nice clean edge. Alright, so now we have all of our buckets nice and emptied out. They look great, other than this one does have that little crack in it, which I'm going to go back and I'm going to patch that with some more clay later. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and make the handles for our buckets before we get to decorating them, because we want to make sure that we can paint around where the handles go through, just so that there's like no white clay showing. So if you're ever going to attach wire to your pieces, do it before you paint them, or do it while you're sculpting if it's, you know, something that has to go through the clay. So I've just got some really thick black wire. I found it at my local craft store. It's pretty sturdy. You can use whatever wire you want. So you're just going to kind of want to find where you want the front of your bucket to be, which I think about right here is where I want my front. So we're just going to look at the top, and I'm going to mark 2 little holes on either side, maybe about a 1/4 inch down from the edge. And then we're just going to go through with our little tool and start drilling. You could also use a Dremel for this. You could use really whatever you think would work. Just trying to be careful so that I don't crack the clay, and we're just going to take it real slow, and just like that we have a perfect little hole. Now I'm just going to grab some of my wire here. I'm just going to cut off a piece, probably about 1 foot long. We're not going to need the whole thing. I want mine a little shorter than this, so I'm probably going to cut off about 1 inch off of each side. We'll see how it looks. And then I'm just going to bend about a 1/2 inch little bracket. And there's our handle. So you can go in and bend these wires back, which is what I'm going to do, just so that the handles don't really come off too easily. And just like that, our bucket bases are done. So at this point, you can paint them however you want. If you just want to go ahead and paint them just like they are, go ahead and put faces on them, you could totally do that. I am going to go back in with some more clay and sculpt up their faces. And then I'll go back over them and paint them. So I'm just gonna throw a time lapse in here while I finish up decorating them, and we'll come back once they're finished. Alright guys, so I figured it'd be best if I just did a little voiceover with a time lapse for the rest of the video, simply because of how long these ended up taking. So I just recorded what I could. I didn't get the entire sculpting process for all 3. I only filmed the sculpting for one of them, but I did show all of the painting process. So I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit about what I'm doing here. So I'm just working on sculpting up their faces with some extra clay. I like to draw their faces on with pencil first, and then that kind of helps me a little bit of a guide to go off of when it comes to sculpting. But I really have no particular method when it comes to sculpting faces. I just start, and whatever it looks like in the end is what it looks like. And I'm really happy with how these guys turned out, and I think they're some of my favorite creations I have ever made. So we're starting on the painting now, and I like to start all of my sculptures with a base color. It depends on what color the finished result should be, or what color the character should be. If it's a yellow or a white or a cream, I'll start with brown. That way it gets in all the little nooks and crannies, and I'll water it down too so that it really kind of soaks into the clay so that I'm painting on a true brown base. And then from there I continuously dry brush layer after layer on top of it so that they have an aged vintage look. For this guy here, I started with a caramel brown color, and then I dry brushed over with a sort of a golden yellow color, and then to top it all off I did a really light dry brush of like a butter yellow just on the high points to really bring out the detail and the textures in the clay. I really like to use this technique, especially for my moon characters, because it really adds the effect of like the moon rock texture. So I'm really happy with how the colors on this guy turned out. He's one of my favorite moons I've ever made, and I can't wait to play around with this color scheme more in the future. Here I'm just adding the details of his eyes and whatnot. I sped it up quite fast because we have a lot of footage to get through. Also just painted the inside of the buckets with black. I just like the way that looked the best, and it just made the most sense to me. Moving on to the pumpkin, I started off with the same brown base color and then started dry brushing on a darker, more reddish orange. I believe this color is actually called scarlet orange. I've searched everywhere to find this exact shade of orange with this level of vibrancy. I find it's like the perfect vintage Halloween orange. The one that I use, I'm pretty sure, is made by Deco Art from Michaels, I believe. Trust me, I have searched every acrylic paint brand, and this is the brightest, most vibrant orange paint that I have found, and it's my favorite. But I did the same techniques. I went in with a lighter yellowy orange to bring out those details, and then I just went in with a smaller brush and started detailing their faces. I absolutely adore how this pumpkin man turned out. He's one of my all-time favorite pumpkins I've ever made. Something about the way his crooked smile and his little teeth just came together perfectly. I just absolutely love how he turned out. So now I'm starting on the black cat bucket, and I'm starting with a base coat of that scarlet orange. This is because I really like to dry brush the black over a dark orange color so that you see all of that texture and all those little crackly bits of orange peeking through. I think it adds such a perfect vintage Halloween look. And I also use this to my advantage when it comes to the mouth and the ears and the outline of the eyes. I just paint around it and leave that base orange there. And for the ears, I kind of just dry brush around it so that it fades into that nice orange and it looks like smooth and blended, kind of like the inside of a cat's ear. Here I'm just outlining around the eyes and leaving that bright orange in the eyes, as well as the nose. I left the nose completely orange because later I do go back and add blushing with eyeshadow or pastel pigments, really whatever I can find that's the right color, just to add more depth and really bring out that texture. And we're nearing the end of the time lapse. I did just want to add this in here at the end before the reveal. I added ruffled collars, but I forgot to mention in the outro of the video, if you'd like to learn how to make the collars, check out my last video I uploaded. I show you everything you need to know about making the collars, and you can apply it to this video as well. Alright, and here are the finished buckets. I am so happy with how these turned out. Here is the little moon bucket. I love how his face turned out. I think that he is So cute. We have, of course, my black cat. I love doing the black cats. These are one of my favorites to make. I just think painting their faces is so fun, and I really love how this guy turned out. And then we have Mr. Jack-o'-lantern. Of course, I couldn't make a Halloween bucket and not make a jack-o'-lantern. I absolutely adore his face. I think he is so cute, and all in all, I am just so happy with how these turned out. I think that they are one of my all-time favorite creations. If you are interested in any of these buckets, they will all be available as part of my 2024 Halloween folk art collection. The collection this year is planned to release on September 1st, but we'll see. We may have to push it back a little bit, but hopefully September 1st. Go follow me over on my Instagram so you don't miss out on when my collection is releasing. All in all, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope that it was helpful. I've never done anything like this. I've never done a tutorial for any of my art pieces before, so I did the best that I could. There was definitely a few bumps here and there, but all in all, I think it turned out pretty good. So let me know your guys' thoughts down in the comments below. Make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications so that you don't miss out on when I post. Also, go check out my small business Bookimi, as well as my Instagram and Facebook page. I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy haunting!